Ruth Parker stood in the shadowed hallway, her arms full of mended shirts. Through the parlor doorway, lamplight spilled warm across floorboards that never quite reached where she stood. Her brother James sat at the writing desk, pen scratching across paper. His wife Cordelia leaned over his shoulder, her laughter like breaking glass. "Send Ruth," Cordelia said, her voice bright with malice. "Send the ugly daughter. Let's see his face when she steps off that stage." James chuckled, dipping his pen. "Poor devil, advertised for a mail-order bride. He'll get exactly what he deserves." "A joke," Cordelia added. "The perfect joke. Ruth the spinster. Ruth the plain one. Can you imagine?" Ruth's fingers tightened on the fabric. The shirts she'd spent the evening mending, replacing buttons they broke without thought. 28 years she'd lived in this house. 28 years of being the youngest, the plainest, the one who didn't matter. After their parents died, she'd become the unpaid servant. Useful for labor, invisible otherwise. She turned toward the dark window at the hallway's end. Her reflection stared back, trapped in the glass. A tired face, brown hair pulled severely back, eyes that had learned not to hope for much. Past marriageable age, they'd said for years, as if age was the problem, not their constant comparisons to her beautiful sisters. The parlor laughter continued. Ruth looked down at the mended shirts, then back at her reflection. Something inside her, something she'd thought long dead, stirred. Maybe someone out there needed what she was. She climbed the stairs to her small room under the eaves. The carpet bag sat in the corner where it had lived for 3 years. Since the last time she tried to leave. That time they'd convinced her to stay. Who would manage the house? Who would do the cooking? Where would she go? This time felt different. Ruth opened the bag and began to pack. One dress for travel, one for best. Her mother's Bible. The packet of seeds she'd saved, tomatoes, beans, herbs. A woman heading west should have something to plant. She folded her spare chemise and added it to the bag. From downstairs, Cordelia's voice drifted up. "We'll tell her tomorrow. Oh, this will be rich." Ruth closed the bag. Her reflection in the small mirror showed someone she barely recognized. Not because her face had changed, but because something in her eyes had shifted. Fear, yes, but also determination. She crossed to the window and looked out at the February snow. Montana Territory, the advertisement had said. A widower with 2 children, seeking a wife to help manage his homestead. Patient disposition and practical skills required. Beauty not necessary, the last line had read. Cordelia had laughed at that too. Ruth traced a finger down the cold glass. The advertisement sat downstairs on James's desk, ready to receive her name as their cruel answer. But what if the man was sincere? What if beauty not necessary meant he truly valued other things? What if someone, somewhere, could see past the surface they all found so lacking? Ruth turned from the window. She wouldn't wait for tomorrow's mockery. She'd write her own letter tonight, post it, before they woke. If they wanted to send her west as a joke, she'd go. But she'd go on her own terms, with her own words, her own introduction. She sat at her small desk and pulled out paper. Her hand trembled as she wrote. "Dear Mr. Brennan," she began, "I am responding to your advertisement. I am 28 years old, practical, and unafraid of hard work. I have no illusions about beauty or romance. I can cook, mend, manage a household, and tend a garden. If you need someone steady and useful, I can be that. I ask only for honesty in return. Yours sincerely, Ruth Parker." She sealed the letter before courage could fail. Tomorrow she'd post it. And then she'd wait. Downstairs, the laughter had finally stopped. The house settled into silence. Ruth blew out her candle and lay in the darkness, her packed bag visible in the moonlight through her window. "Maybe someone out there needs what I am," she whispered again. This time, she let herself believe it might be true. The stage rattled through endless white. 3 days now, jolting over frozen ruts. The Montana Territory spreading vast and empty beyond the frosted windows. Ruth sat wedged between 2 other passengers, her small bag clutched on her lap, rehearsing words she'd likely never get to say. "Mr. Brennan, I'm Ruth Parker. Thank you for your honesty about my appearance. I understand completely. I'll take the next stage back east." She practiced variations. Each one ended the same way, with her leaving. The response to her letter had arrived within 2 weeks. His handwriting was clear, unpracticed. "Miss Parker, your letter was the only honest one I received. I would be grateful if you would come. The children are Sarah, age 7, and Thomas, age 4. My late wife, Margaret, died 3 years past. I make no promises except respect and fair treatment. If that suits, the stage runs twice monthly. Mark Brennan." Cordelia had found the letter. Her shrieking had brought James running. She actually wrote him. The fool actually wrote him back. They'd laughed until they wept. Then they'd insisted she go. "We'll pay your passage," James had said, wiping his eyes. This is too good to waste. So here she sat, heading toward rejection. At least it would be honest rejection. First time out west? The woman beside her was perhaps 60, weathered and kind-faced. She'd boarded in the last town, traveling to visit her daughter. "Yes, ma'am." Ruth's voice came out rougher than intended. "Visiting family?" Ruth hesitated. The woman's eyes were patient, genuinely curious. Something about the vast landscape outside, the way they were all strangers, suspended between lives, loosened her tongue. "I'm a mail-order bride," Ruth said quietly, "or supposed to be. My family sent me as a joke. They think I'm too plain to be wanted." The woman's face shifted. Not pity, but something fiercer. She reached over and gripped Ruth's hand. "Then he's getting something better than he bargained for," she said firmly. "I've known plenty of pretty women who were rotten inside. And I've known plain women who made the world better just by being in it. Anyone with eyes that kind," she gestured to Ruth's face, "is worth 10 pretty faces." Ruth's throat tightened. She looked down at their joined hands. The woman's palm was calloused, work-worn, real. "I brought seeds," Ruth said, not sure why she was sharing this. "For a garden. It's foolish, probably." "It's hope," the woman corrected. "That's never foolish." The stage crested a rise. Below, a small settlement huddled against the cold. A handful of buildings, smoke rising from chimneys. Mountains looming beyond. Cedar Bend, the driver had said that morning. Their destination. Ruth's heart began to pound. "What's his name?" the woman asked. "Mark Brennan. He's a widower. 2 children. Lost his wife, has young ones to raise, and asks for honesty over beauty." The woman nodded. "Sounds like a man who knows what matters." The stage began its descent. Ruth could see figures now, people moving between buildings. Her hands felt numb despite her gloves. "What if he takes one look and sends me back?" "Then he's a fool," the woman said simply. "But I don't think he will be. A man who writes, 'Beauty not necessary,' is telling you something important. He's already looking for what you have." The stage rolled onto the main street. Ruth's breath fogged the window as she searched the small crowd gathered. There, a tall man, broad-shouldered in a worn coat, hat in hand. 2 small shapes clung to his legs, bundled against the cold. The stage jerked to a halt. Ruth's rehearsed words evaporated. She couldn't remember a single variation of her goodbye speech. She could only see the man approaching as the driver opened the door, his face anxious but not cruel, weathered by sun and wind and loss. The woman squeezed her hand once more. "Go find out who you really are," she whispered. Ruth gathered her bag. Her legs trembled as she stepped down from the stage. The late afternoon sun slanted across the frozen street. The man stopped 3 feet away, 2 children peering from behind him. This was it. The moment her family had laughed about. The moment she'd braced herself for since leaving. Ruth lifted her chin and met Mark Brennan's eyes, and he smiled. Mark Brennan's smile wasn't polite or forced. It reached his eyes, crinkling the corners, warming his weathered face. Ruth froze on the stage step, one hand gripping the doorframe. "Miss Parker?" His voice was low, gentle. "I'm mighty glad you've come." Ruth's prepared words scattered. She'd expected disappointment, awkwardness, perhaps pity. Not this open welcome, as if she were something hoped for rather than endured. She descended the final step. Her legs felt unsteady. "Mr. Brennan." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. A small face peeked from behind his legs. A girl, perhaps 7, with dark braids and her father's serious eyes. She studied Ruth for a long moment, then stepped forward. "Papa," she said clearly, "she has kind eyes, like Mama did." Ruth's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, looking down, then back at the child. The little girl gazed up at her with such earnest observation that Ruth couldn't speak. "This is Sarah," Mark said softly. "And the shy one there is Thomas." A smaller boy, maybe 4, peered from his father's other side, thumb in his mouth. "Hello," Ruth managed. She crouched down, bringing herself to Sarah's level. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a very long time." Sarah smiled tentatively. Thomas took his thumb out long enough to whisper, "Hello, miss." Mark cleared his throat. "I have the wagon just there. It's about 40 minutes to the homestead. You must be tired from the journey." Ruth stood, and Mark reached for her bag. Their hands brushed. He lifted it easily, then gestured toward a weathered wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. The children ran ahead, climbing into the back. As Mark helped Ruth onto the seat, she noticed his hands. Calloused, careful, strong. Hands that had worked hard and known loss. He climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. The wagon rolled out of town. Ruth sat rigid, unsure where to look or what to say. The landscape spread vast around them. White fields, distant mountains, sky so big it seemed to swallow everything. "I want to be honest, Miss Parker," Mark said after several minutes. "I know what my advertisement said. I meant every word. I'm not looking for someone to admire on my arm in town. I need a partner. Someone patient with children, willing to work alongside me. Someone who won't quit when things get hard, which they will." Ruth listened, her throat tight. This wasn't the conversation she'd expected. "I understand if you're disappointed by the place," he continued. "It's modest. The cabin's sound, but it's no mansion. The work's constant. Winter's been hard this year." "Mr. Brennan," Ruth interrupted softly. He glanced at her. She looked down at her hands. "I'm not disappointed. I'm confused." "Confused?" "You're being kind," she said carefully. "And I'm grateful. But we both know why I'm here. My family sent me as a joke. They told me so. I'm the plain daughter, the one nobody wanted. They thought it would be funny to send me to you. I came anyway because anywhere seemed better than there. But you don't have to pretend." The wagon creaked along. Mark was quiet for so long Ruth thought she'd offended him. Then he pulled the horses to a stop. He turned to face her fully. "Miss Parker, I'm going to tell you something, and I hope you'll believe me. I got 7 letters answering that advertisement. 6 of them were from women describing their beauty, their accomplishments, their fine qualities. Yours was the only one that told the truth. The only one that offered what I actually needed: steadiness, honesty, practical help. Do you understand? You're not a joke. You're an answer." Ruth stared at him. His eyes were steady, sincere. "I've been alone 3 years," he said quietly, "raising these children, trying to keep the place running. Some days I'm so tired I can barely think. I need someone who sees this life clearly and chooses it anyway. Someone like you." From the wagon bed, Sarah's voice piped up. "Papa says you're exactly what he's been praying for. He told us last night." Mark's neck reddened slightly, but he nodded. "I did say that." Ruth's hands trembled. She folded them tightly. "I can cook and mend and manage a household. I'm good with gardens. I don't quit easily." "I know," Mark said. "I could tell from your letter." He urged the horses forward again. The homestead came into view, a sturdy cabin, weathered barn, snow-covered fields. A broken section of fence leaned at an angle. The place had the look of being loved but overwhelmed, like a man trying to do the work of three. "It needs a lot," Mark admitted, "but it's sound underneath." Ruth looked at the cabin, the smoke rising from its chimney, the lamplight already glowing in the windows. Something inside her chest loosened, just slightly. "I think it's perfect," she said. Mark pulled the wagon to a stop before the cabin door. He climbed down, then helped Ruth descend. The children tumbled out behind them. Sarah took Ruth's hand without hesitation. "Come see your room," she said. "Papa cleaned it special." Ruth let herself be led inside. The cabin was simple. Rough wooden walls, handmade furniture, everything scrupulously clean but showing signs of hard use. A fire crackled in the stone hearth. The warmth enveloped her like an embrace. Mark set her bag down. "The small room there is yours. Take your time settling in. Supper's in about an hour. Nothing fancy, I'm afraid." Ruth turned to face him. He stood in the lamplight, hat in hand, waiting for her verdict. Behind him, the children watched with hopeful faces. She'd crossed a continent expecting rejection. Instead, she'd found this: a man who valued honesty, children who saw kindness in her eyes, a place that needed her. "Thank you," Ruth said quietly, "for seeing past what they said I was." Mark's expression softened. "I'm seeing exactly what you are, Miss Parker, and it's exactly enough." Ruth carried her bag to the small room. She set it on the narrow bed and stood for a moment in the doorway, looking back at the cabin's main room, at the fire, the worn furniture, the man and children who'd welcomed her without hesitation. She'd passed the point of no return. She was home. The first week passed in a rhythm Ruth had never known. Not the rhythm of serving others who never thanked her, but the rhythm of building something alongside people who noticed her effort. She woke before dawn that first morning, uncertain of her place. Mark was already up, starting the fire. He glanced at her in surprise. "You don't have to rise so early," he said. "I want to," Ruth replied. And she did. She learned the homestead's needs quickly. The cabin had been cleaned but not organized. Dishes stacked haphazardly, mending piled in corners. The children's clothes mixed with Mark's. Ruth moved through it carefully, not taking over, but creating order where chaos had reigned. The children watched her like wary creatures ready to bolt. She didn't push. Instead, she mended Thomas's torn shirt and left it on his bed without comment. She noticed Sarah trying to braid her own hair and offered quietly, "Would you like help with that?" Sarah had hesitated, then nodded. By the third day, Thomas showed her his collection of special rocks. By the fifth, Sarah asked if Ruth knew any stories. Mark worked from dawn to dusk, mending tack, tending livestock, chopping wood. Ruth watched him move through tasks with steady determination. A man holding exhaustion at bay through sheer will. She began taking on what she could. She fed the chickens, discovered the hen house door hung crooked, and spent an afternoon fixing it with tools from the barn. She was working on the door when Mark appeared in the doorway. The setting sun slanted behind him, turning him into a silhouette. Ruth looked up, hammer in hand. "You fixed it," he said, his voice carrying something like wonder. "The hinge was loose," Ruth explained, "and the frame had warped. It just needed attention." Mark stepped closer, examining her work. His expression was unguarded, gratitude mixed with something deeper that Ruth couldn't name. She looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. "You think I'm disappointed," she said quietly, "when you look at me like that." "Disappointed?" Mark's voice held surprise. "Ruth, I'm amazed. Every day you find something that needs doing, and you just do it. Without complaining, without asking for thanks. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Ruth set down the hammer. I just want to be useful. You're more than useful, Mark said. Then, as if the words had gone too far, he cleared his throat. I should finish the evening feeding. He left quickly. Ruth stood alone in the hen house, her heart beating strangely. That Sunday, a neighbor came to visit. Mrs. Hartley arrived in a wagon with her husband, ostensibly to welcome Ruth. But her eyes swept Ruth from head to toe with cold assessment. So you're the bride Mark sent for, Mrs. Hartley said, her smile sharp. How practical. Ruth served coffee with steady hands. Mrs. Hartley made conversation that felt like examination. Where was Ruth from? What was her family like? What skills did she possess? Each answer seemed to disappoint. Of course, Mark's first wife was quite lovely, Mrs. Hartley said, stirring her coffee. Margaret had the most beautiful singing voice. Everyone in the territory knew her. Such a loss. Her eyes flickered to Ruth. I'm sure you'll do your best to fill her shoes. The comparison landed like a blow. Ruth kept her expression neutral, but something inside her withered. After the Hartleys left, Sarah found Ruth in the kitchen. Why was Mrs. Hartley being mean about your face? Ruth's hands stilled in the dishwater. Was she being mean? She kept looking at you funny, like she was trying to figure something out. Sarah leaned against the counter. I think you're pretty. Ruth's throat tightened. She looked down at the small, earnest face. That's kind of you to say. Papa thinks so too, Sarah added, matter-of-factly. I heard him tell Mr. Hartley you were the finest woman he'd met. Mr. Hartley laughed, and Papa got quiet. He gets quiet when he's angry. Ruth pulled her hands from the water, drying them slowly. She wanted to ask what else had been said, but that felt wrong. Instead, she touched Sarah's braided hair gently. Thank you for telling me. That evening, after the children were asleep, Ruth stood outside, looking at the cold frame Mark had built at her request. He'd done it without question, placing it where she'd suggested, making it exactly the size she'd needed. She'd planted her early seeds there, lettuce, radishes, herbs that could survive the lingering cold. She knelt beside the frame, checking the soil moisture. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Mark's boots crunched in the snow. They're not up yet, she said without turning. They will be. He crouched beside her. You have a gift with growing things. My mother taught me, Ruth said. Before she died, it's one of the few things that was just mine. Ruth, Mark's voice was serious. What Mrs. Hartley said today. She was honest, Ruth interrupted. Your first wife was beautiful. I'm not. It's just a fact. It's not the fact that matters, Mark said. Margaret was beautiful, yes, and I loved her. But she's gone. You're here, and you're not less than her. You're just different. These children need someone steady and kind. I need a partner who sees this life and doesn't run from it. Beauty doesn't mend fences or fix henhouse doors or make Thomas laugh at breakfast. Ruth finally looked at him. His face was earnest in the lamplight spilling from the cabin. I want you to know, Mark continued, that every day you're here, I'm grateful. Not because you're useful, though you are, because you're you. He stood and went back inside. Ruth stayed by the cold frame, her hands pressed against the wooden sides, her eyes stinging with something that might have been tears or might have been hope. She was beginning to believe him. The warm afternoon arrived unexpectedly in mid-March, as if spring had decided to send a scout ahead. The temperature rose above freezing for the first time in weeks. Snowmelt ran in rivulets, and the air carried the scent of thawing earth. Can we go to the creek? Sarah asked during lunch. Please? Mark glanced at Ruth. Would you like to see it? The water will be running high. Ruth nodded. She'd spent 3 weeks learning the homestead's immediate boundaries, but hadn't ventured far. After the meal, they bundled the children and walked through thinning snow toward the sound of rushing water. The creek had transformed. What Mark said was usually a calm trickle had swollen to a torrent, brown with silt, carrying branches and debris. Thomas squealed at the light, staying well back from the edge. Sarah found a stick and threw it in, watching it race away. Ruth stood on the bank, feeling the sun on her face. The warmth felt like a promise. "This is when I know winter's really ending," Mark said beside her, "when the creek breaks free." "It's beautiful," Ruth said. "Violent, but beautiful." They watched the children play. Mark picked up his own stick and skipped it across a calmer pool. Thomas tried to copy him, his short arms not quite managing the motion. Ruth laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that surprised her. "I haven't heard you laugh before," Mark said quietly. Ruth's smile faded. "I haven't had much reason to before." "Tell me about them," Mark said. "Your family. I know they sent you as a joke, but I don't know more than that." Ruth hesitated. The creek rushed past. Sarah and Thomas had moved downstream, examining something in the shallows. She and Mark stood in a pocket of privacy, surrounded by the sound of breaking ice and moving water. "I was the youngest of 5, Ruth began. 4 sisters, all beautiful. I was the disappointment from birth. My mother loved me anyway, I think. But she died when I was 15. After that, I became the household help. My sisters married well, my brothers inherited. I was just there. Useful for cooking and mending, but not worth much else." "That's not true," Mark said sharply. "It was their truth," Ruth corrected. "They compared me constantly to my sisters. Every family dinner, every social event. If only Ruth had Mary's face, or Ruth would do better if she looked like Catherine. After years of it, you start to believe them." Mark's jaw was tight. They were fools. "They sent me here as a joke," Ruth continued. "Laughed about it in the parlor. I heard them. Let's see his face when the ugly daughter steps off the stage. I came anyway because even a joke felt better than staying where I was invisible." The words hung in the spring air. Mark stared at the rushing water, his hands clenched. "They were fools," he repeated, "who couldn't recognize treasure. What they saw as plain, I see as honest. What they saw as lacking, I see as real. Ruth, look at me." She turned. His expression was fierce, protective. "You're not invisible here," he said. "The children see you. I see you. And what we see is someone kind and capable and good. Someone worth having in our lives." Ruth's vision blurred. She looked away quickly, but Mark caught her hand. "I know it's early," he said. "I know we barely know each other, but I want you to know that having you here, it's changed everything. The cabin feels like a home again. The children are happier. I'm happier. And it's not because you're useful. It's because you're you." "Papa, Miss Ruth!" Sarah's voice carried across the sound of the creek. "Come look, we found frog eggs." The moment broke. Mark released Ruth's hand, but something had shifted between them. They walked toward the children, and Sarah pointed excitedly at a mass of clear jelly studded with dark spots. "They'll be tadpoles soon," Mark explained to Thomas. "Then frogs." "Like magic," Thomas breathed. "Like growing," Sarah corrected. "Right, Miss Ruth?" "Right," Ruth said softly. "Everything grows, given the right conditions." They walked back to the homestead as the sun began to descend. The children ran ahead, energized by the spring warmth. Mark walked beside Ruth in comfortable silence. At the cabin, while Mark put the children down for rest time, Ruth checked her cold frame. The first green shoots had pushed through the soil, tiny, delicate, impossible. She touched one gently with her fingertip. "They're up," Mark said from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "They are." "I want to tell you something," Mark said. "After Margaret died, I thought I'd never feel anything again except duty. I'd raise the children, keep the place running, and that would be enough. But these past weeks, I've felt something else. Hope, maybe, or possibility. He paused. I think I'm falling in love with you, Ruth. And I don't know if that's too much to say or too soon, but I want you to know it. Ruth stayed motionless, staring at the green shoots. Her heart pounded. You don't have to say anything, Mark continued quickly. I just wanted you to know. You're not here as a joke, or as help, or as anything except someone I'm grateful for. Someone I'm beginning to love. He went back inside. Ruth stayed by the cold frame as evening descended, her hand pressed against the wooden edge, tears sliding down her face. That night, Thomas was restless. Ruth heard him crying and went to his room. He sat up in bed, sobbing. I had a bad dream, he whimpered. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed. Do you want to tell me about it? You went away, Thomas said through tears. Like Mama did. You just disappeared. Oh, sweetheart, Ruth pulled him close. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Ruth's throat tightened. She thought of Mark's words, of the green shoots pushing through cold soil, of her own guarded heart beginning to open. I promise, she whispered. Thomas snuggled against her. Can I call you Mama? Ruth froze. The word hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and perfect. I mean Miss Ruth Mama, Thomas corrected quickly, sensing her hesitation. His face crumpled. I'm sorry. No, Ruth said, her voice breaking. Thomas, that's the most beautiful name anyone's ever called me. You can call me that any time you want. She held him until he fell asleep, then carried him back to bed. When she turned, Mark stood in the doorway. He'd heard everything. Their eyes met in the lamplight. Neither of them spoke. But Mark reached out and touched her shoulder gently before disappearing into his own room. Ruth stood in the hallway, her heart full of something she'd never felt before. Something that felt dangerously like belonging. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The circuit rider brought mail twice a month, and Mark always collected it in town. He returned with supplies in a single envelope which he handed to Ruth without comment. Ruth recognized the handwriting immediately. Her brother, James. She took it to her room and closed the door. Her hand shook as she opened the seal. The words leapt off the page like vipers. Dearest Ruth, James had written, though there was no affection in the text that followed. We've been wondering how the joke is playing out. Has he sent you packing yet? Or is he too polite to admit his disappointment? I imagine by now you've realized your position there. Charity case. Unpaid help. The plain woman who won't be missed when she returns. Cordelia says you can come back whenever you're ready to admit defeat. We'll always have work for you here, if nothing else. Your loving brother, James. Ruth read it 3 times. Each time, the words cut deeper. The progress of the past month dissolved like snow in spring rain. Every kind word Mark had said reframed itself as pity. Every smile from the children became tolerance of an unwanted burden. She was the joke. She'd always been the joke. Ruth pulled her carpet bag from under the bed. Her hands moved mechanically, folding her spare dress, adding her mother's Bible. The packet of seeds could stay. They'd been foolish hope anyway. She'd leave at dawn before the family woke. She'd walk to town if necessary. She was fastening the bag when footsteps sounded outside her door. A knock. Ruth? Mark's voice. Supper's ready. I'm not hungry, she called back. Silence. Then, Ruth, what's wrong? Nothing. Ruth, more insistent now. Open the door. She shouldn't. She should wait until he left, finish packing, disappear before she damaged these people any further. But something in his tone made her hand turn the knob. Mark stood in the hallway, still in his work clothes. His eyes went immediately to the packed bag on the bed behind her. His face paled. What are you doing? I'm leaving, Ruth said. Her voice sounded flat to her own ears. It's better this way. Better? Mark stepped into the room. Ruth, what happened? This. She thrust the letter at him. From my brother. A reminder of what I really am here. A joke that's gone on too long. You don't have to be kind anymore, Mark. I know I'm not what you wanted. I know the children would be better off with someone they could actually love, not someone they feel obligated to tolerate. I'll leave quietly. You can tell them I had to return home. They'll forget me soon enough. Mark read the letter, his jaw tightening with each line. When he finished, he crumpled it in his fist. This is poison, he said. It's truth, Ruth countered. I've been fooling myself. Your kindness made me believe I could be something I'm not. But I'm the ugly daughter they sent as a joke, and I always will be. I won't stay where I'm pitied. Pitied? Mark's voice rose. Ruth, you think I pity you? What else would you call it? You've been so careful, so kind. But I'm not blind. I see how you look at Margaret's things, the beautiful wife you lost. I know I'm just the practical replacement. Stop, Mark interrupted. Just stop. Is that really what you think? That I'm pretending? That the children are pretending? I think you're good. People trying to make the best of a bad situation, Ruth said quietly. But I won't stay where I'm a burden. From the main room, Sarah's voice called out, Papa? Miss Ruth, Mama? Supper's getting cold. Ruth flinched at the name. See? They shouldn't call me that. It's not fair to them. Forming attachments to someone who can't be what they need. What they need? Mark's voice cracked. Ruth, they need someone who stays. Someone who doesn't leave them like their mother did. And you're about to walk out that door because some cruel fool who never saw your worth told you lies you want to believe. They're not lies, Ruth said. Look at me, Mark. Really look. I'm plain and awkward and I don't belong here. I never did. Mark stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned and walked out. Ruth heard him speak quietly to the children in the main room, heard their confused responses. The front door opened and closed. She sank onto her bed, the bag beside her. This was right. This was necessary. She'd leave at first light, and everyone would be better for it. An hour later, small footsteps approached. Sarah and Thomas appeared in her doorway, both in their night clothes. Sarah's eyes were red. Papa says you're leaving, Sarah said, her voice small. I have to, Ruth managed. Why? Thomas asked. Did we do something bad? No, sweetheart, never. You're both perfect. Then why? Sarah's voice broke. Papa said Mama left because she died. She didn't want to go. But you're choosing to leave. That means we're not good enough. That's not true, Ruth said desperately. Then stay, Sarah pleaded. Please, Miss Ruth, Mama. Please don't leave us like Mama did. Please. Both children were crying now. Thomas climbed onto the bed and clung to Ruth's arm. Sarah stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. We love you, Sarah said. Isn't that enough? Ruth pulled both children close, her own tears falling. I love you too. That's why I have to go. I'm not what you need. I'm not enough. You are. Thomas sobbed against her shoulder. You are enough. They cried together until Mark returned. He stood in the doorway, his face drawn. Children, it's time for bed. Papa, make her stay, Sarah begged. I can't make her do anything, Mark said quietly. Miss Ruth has to choose. He took the children to their rooms. Ruth heard him speaking softly, heard their renewed sobbing, heard him singing them to sleep with a lullaby that cracked halfway through. She sat alone in a room, the crumpled letter on the floor, her bag packed, her heart breaking. At midnight, she still hadn't moved. The house was silent. Ruth looked at her reflection in the dark window. The same plain face, the same disappointment she'd always been. Except now, that face was wet with tears. And behind her in the reflection, the empty room looked unbearably lonely. What if Mark was right? What if James was the liar, and this family, this homestead, this impossible belonging was the truth? Ruth covered her face with her hands and wept. Mark couldn't sleep. He sat in the main room, the fire burning low, his late wife's Bible open in his lap, though he wasn't reading it. 3 a.m, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ruth's packed bag, heard the children sobbing, felt his own helplessness. He'd meant everything he'd said to her, but words couldn't undo years of cruelty, couldn't overcome the poison her family had planted so deeply. Margaret's Bible felt heavy in his hands. He and his late wife had loved each other, yes, but their love had been different, young, uncomplicated, built on shared dreams of the life they'd create together. They'd never really faced hardship together. She died before they could. What he felt for Ruth was something else entirely. It was built on watching her mend a fence she didn't have to fix, on seeing her patience with his children when they tested her boundaries. On the way, she checked her cold frame every evening, tending hope in the form of green shoots. On her quiet strength, her honesty, her refusal to pretend everything was easy when it wasn't. He loved Ruth because she was real, in a way he'd never fully understood the value of until she arrived. And he was about to lose her because he hadn't made her believe it. Mark closed the Bible and stood. He crossed to Ruth's closed door and stood outside it, gathering courage. Then he knocked softly. "Ruth, I know you're awake. I can see the lamplight under your door." Silence. Then, "Please go away, Mark." "I can't," he said to the wooden barrier between them. "Not until I say this. Will you open the door?" "I can't face you right now." "Then I'll talk to the door," Mark said. "But I need you to hear this." He leaned his forehead against the wood and began to speak. "When Margaret died, I thought my life was over except for duty. I'd raise the children, and that would be enough. I'd never let anyone close again because losing her had hurt too much. For 3 years, I just existed, going through motions, keeping us alive but not really living." He heard movement inside the room. Ruth was listening. "Then I got your letter," Mark continued, "and something in it, the honesty, the directness, made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for romance or beauty or any of that. Hope that maybe I could have a partner, someone who saw this life clearly and chose it anyway." "Mark," Ruth's voice came through the door. "Let me finish," he said. "Please. When you stepped off that stage, you were braced for rejection. I could see it in every line of your body. But Ruth, I wasn't disappointed. I was grateful. Grateful you'd come. Grateful you were real. Grateful you weren't some fragile thing that would break under the weight of this life." He pressed his palm flat against the door. "These past weeks, watching you with my children, seeing you make this house a home, working alongside you. Ruth, I haven't been pretending. I've been falling in love. Not with the idea of having help, but with you. The woman who fixes what's broken without asking for thanks. Who plants seeds in frozen ground because she believes in spring. Who reads my children's stories and mends their clothes and makes them feel safe." His voice cracked. "Your brother's letter was full of lies. He's wrong about everything. You're not charity. You're not a burden. You're not the ugly daughter or the joke or any of those cruel things they told you. You're the answer to prayers I didn't know how to pray." Silence. Then the door opened. Ruth stood there, face blotchy from crying, hair disheveled, still in her day dress. She'd never looked more beautiful to him. "How can you say that?" she whispered. "How can you mean it?" "Because it's true," Mark said simply. "Ruth, I know you don't see yourself the way I see you. Years of cruelty taught you lies about your worth. But I'm asking you to let me show you the truth. Not just with words, but with time, with patience, with proof." "I'm terrified," Ruth admitted. "What if I'm not enough? What if the children realize they'd be better off with someone else? What if you wake up one day and see what my family always saw?" "Then I'd be blind," Mark said. "Ruth, you're not too much or too little. You're exactly right. For this place, for these children, for me. Will you stay? Not as help or charity, but as my partner? As someone I want to build a life with?" Ruth's eyes filled with fresh tears. "What if I fail you?" "What if you don't?" Mark countered gently. "What if you let yourself be loved? What if you stop believing their lies and start believing my truth?" "I want to," Ruth said. "I want to so badly. It frightens me." "Then try," Mark said. "Just try. One day at a time. Let me show you who you really are. Let the children show you. Let this place show you." Ruth looked past him toward the main room, the fire still glowing, the handmade furniture, the cabin that had become home. Then she looked down at her hands, the capable hands that had fixed and mended and tended. "I already love them," she whispered. "Your children. I love them so much it hurts." "I know," Mark said. "They love you too. They need you, Ruth. Not because they have to, but because you've made them feel safe and seen and valued, just like you've made me feel." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back. When she didn't, he took her hands in his. "Stay," he said, "please. Let me love you the way you deserve. Let me spend the rest of my life showing you your worth. You're not the joke they sent. You're the answer I needed." Ruth's tears fell freely now. "I'm scared." "I know," Mark said. "But stay scared here with us. Don't run back to people who never saw you. Stay with people who do." Outside, the darkness was beginning to soften. Not quite dawn, but the first hint that night was ending. Through the window, Ruth could see the sky lightening over the mountains. "One day at a time?" she asked tremulously. "One day at a time," Mark confirmed. "And Ruth, I'm going to take you to church Sunday. I'm going to sit you in the family pew and make it clear to everyone in this territory that you're mine, that you're staying, that anyone who wants to speak of you with anything less than respect can leave." Ruth stared at him. "You do that?" "I'll do whatever it takes," Mark said simply. "Because you're worth fighting for. You're worth defending. And it's time the world knew it." Ruth looked down at their joined hands. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay. I'll try." Mark's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen since the letter arrived. He squeezed her hands gently, then released them. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll face tomorrow together." He left her doorway. Ruth stood for a long moment, then crossed to the window. Dawn was truly breaking now, the first morning in weeks without frost visible on the glass. Spring was coming. She unpacked her bag slowly, putting each item back in its place. When she was done, she set the empty bag back under the bed and blew out her lamp. Tomorrow, Mark would take a stand for her. Tomorrow, she'd let him. Tonight, she'd chosen to stay. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Ruth stood in her small room, smoothing down her best dress with trembling hands. It was simple brown wool, mended at the elbows, nothing fine. But it was clean, and it was hers. Through the door, she heard Mark readying the children. Sarah's excited chatter. Thomas asking if they were really going to church with Miss Ruth Mama. Mark's steady responses, calm and sure. Ruth studied her reflection. The same plain face looked back. But something in her eyes had changed. Fear still lived there, yes, but also determination. A knock. "Ruth, are you ready?" She opened the door. Mark stood in his Sunday suit, worn but dignified. The children flanked him, scrubbed and dressed in their best. Sarah wore the hair ribbon Ruth had mended for her. Thomas clutched a small wooden horse Mark had carved. "You look perfect," Mark said quietly. "I look the same as always," Ruth corrected. "Exactly," Mark said, and smiled. The ride to town took 40 minutes. Ruth sat beside Mark on the wagon seat, the children in back, her hands twisted in her lap. Mark reached over and stilled them with his own hand. "I've got you," he said. "Remember that." Cedar Bend's church was a simple wooden structure with a bell tower and plain glass windows. Wagons and horses filled the yard. People clustered on the steps, talking in the morning sun. They turned as the Brennan wagon approached. Ruth felt their eyes. Felt their assessment, their judgment, their curiosity. Her chest tightened. "Breathe," Mark murmured. He helped her down from the wagon, then took her arm. Not hiding her, but presenting her. Sarah grabbed Ruth's other hand. Thomas clung to Mark's coat. They walked toward the church entrance. People parted. Mrs. Hartley stood near the door, her expression sharp with surprise. And something else. Disapproval, perhaps, or calculation. Mark led them inside. The Brennan family pew was third from the front. He ushered Ruth in first, then the children, then took his place on the aisle. Protective formation. Ruth's heart hammered. The service began. Ruth barely heard it. She was too aware of the whispers behind them, the sideways glances. Sarah pressed close against her side. Ruth put her arm around the girl, and Sarah snuggled in. Halfway through, Thomas climbed into Ruth's lap and fell asleep. She held him gently, this child who'd called her mama, and felt tears prick her eyes. After the service, as people filed out, Mrs. Hartley positioned herself in the aisle. Her voice carried clearly. "Mark, might I have a word about this situation?" Mark stood. "Of course, Mrs. Hartley. Speak. In private might be more appropriate." "Here is fine," Mark said. His voice was pleasant, but immovable. Mrs. Hartley's smile thinned. "Very well. I'm simply concerned about propriety. Miss Parker's position in your household is somewhat irregular. The children calling her such familiar names, the way you're presenting her, people are beginning to talk." "Let them talk," Mark said. "It's just that, with your first wife's memory—" "Don't speak of my first wife," Mark interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying steel. "Margaret was my wife. I loved her. She died. Ruth is here now, and she's going to be my wife, if she'll have me." The church went silent. Ruth's breath caught. Mark turned slightly, addressing not just Mrs. Hartley, but the entire congregation now watching with open interest. "I want everyone here to know something," he said. "Ruth Parker came to Montana as my mail-order bride. She came expecting rejection and found welcome instead. She spent the past 6 weeks making my house a home, loving my children, working harder than any person I've known. And I'll be damned if I let anyone in this church or this territory speak of her as anything less than the finest woman I've had the privilege to know." Mrs. Hartley's face reddened. "Mark, really, there's no need to be dramatic." "There's every need," Mark said. He looked directly at Ruth now. "Because she's been told her whole life that she's not enough, that her worth lies only in being useful, that she's the joke, the burden, the disappointment, and every word of it is a lie." He stepped into the aisle, blocking Mrs. Hartley's view of Ruth. "Ruth is kind to my children when she doesn't have to be," he continued. "She's patient when things are hard. She's honest when most people would pretend. She sees what needs doing and does it without asking for recognition. She plants hope in frozen ground because she believes in spring. She's exactly what I prayed for, even when I didn't know how to pray. And I'm asking her, here in front of all of you, to marry me." Ruth stood slowly, Thomas still drowsy in her arms. The entire church watched. She could feel their eyes, some kind, some skeptical, some simply curious. But in that moment, none of them mattered, except the man standing in the aisle, waiting for her answer. "You mean it," she said. Not a question, but a statement of dawning realization. "Every word," Mark said. "You're beautiful to me, Ruth, not despite who you are, but because of it. Will you marry me?" Sarah tugged Ruth's skirt. "Say yes, Miss Ruth Mama. Please say yes." Thomas stirred and mumbled sleepily. "Is Miss Ruth Mama really going to be our mama?" Ruth looked at the children, then at Mark. His face was open, vulnerable, certain. Behind him, she saw a few people smiling. The woman from the stage, now identified as Mrs. Carson, dabbing her eyes. A rancher and his wife, nodding approval. Mrs. Hartley's mouth was pinched, but she was already turning away, dismissed by Mark's clear stance. Ruth shifted Thomas on her hip and reached out her free hand to Mark. "Yes," she said clearly. "I'll marry you." The church erupted in murmurs, but Mark's smile drowned out everything else. He took her hand and raised it gently to his lips. "Thank you," he whispered. Outside, several people approached with genuine warmth. Mrs. Carson hugged Ruth carefully around Thomas. "I knew you'd find out who you really are," she said. A younger couple introduced themselves, the Prescotts, who lived one property over. "We'd be—" Sarah beamed, squeezing Ruth's hand. Thomas woke fully and announced to anyone who would listen, "Miss Ruth Mama is going to be our real mama now." As they drove home, Ruth sat close to Mark on the wagon seat. The children chattered in back about wedding plans and whether there would be cake. That's all. Ruth looked at the landscape rolling past. The same mountains, the same fields, but somehow transformed by spring's advance and her own changed perspective. "I'm starting to see it," she said. "What you see. Not all the way, but starting." Mark's hand found hers. "That's all I ask. One day at a time." When they reached the homestead, Ruth noticed something she'd missed in the morning's nervousness. The broken fence was completely mended. The garden area was turned and ready for full planting. The henhouse door showed fresh paint. "When did you do all this?" she asked. "Every evening this week," Mark said, "while I was building courage for today. Figured you deserved to come home to a place that showed how much you're valued." Ruth's eyes stung. She climbed down from the wagon and walked to the garden plot. The soil was dark and ready, waiting for the seeds she brought and the plants she'd nurtured. Behind her, the children ran to play. Mark came to stand beside her. "Welcome home," he said softly. "For real this time." Ruth nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She was home. She was seen. She was loved. And for the first time in her life, she was beginning to believe she deserved it. The wedding was simple. Mrs. Prescott and Mrs. Carson organized it with quiet efficiency, transforming Mark's cabin into something approaching festive. Wildflowers in tin cups, fresh bread and simple cake. A handful of genuine friends gathered to witness. Ruth wore a dress Mrs. Carson helped her sew, nothing fancy, but made with care from fabric the color of spring sky. Sarah braided her hair and wove in small white flowers. Thomas presented her with a smooth stone from his collection, his highest treasure. "For luck," he said solemnly. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony in the cabin's main room. Ruth's hands shook as she placed them in Mark's. His grip was steady, anchoring her. "I see you, Ruth," Mark said when it was time for vows. His voice was clear enough for everyone to hear, but his eyes held only her. "I'll spend my life making sure you see yourself the way I do. as worthy of every good thing. As the answer to prayers I didn't know to speak, as exactly enough. Ruth's voice trembled. I was looking for acceptance. I found home. I'll spend my life being worthy of that gift. You already are, Mark said softly. They were pronounced husband and wife. The small gathering applauded. Sarah and Thomas rushed forward, wrapping around both of them. We're really a family now, Sarah said, her face glowing. We always were, Ruth replied. Now it's just official. The celebration was modest, but warm. Mrs. Carson hugged Ruth tightly and whispered, I knew you'd find your place. The Prescotts promised to visit often. Even a few of the skeptics from church made appearances, their attitudes thawed by Mark's clear devotion and Ruth's obvious belonging. As evening came, the guests departed. Mark cleaned up while Ruth tucked the children into bed. Sarah hugged her tightly. I'm glad you stayed, she said. I'm glad you didn't leave like you were going to. I am too, Ruth said honestly. More than I can say. Will you tell us a story about how you and Papa fell in love? Ruth smiled. That's a long story. We have time, Thomas said, already drowsy. So Ruth told them a simplified version, about being afraid and Mark being kind, about learning to see herself differently, about how... The end? Thomas asked when she finished. No, Ruth said, the beginning. After the children slept, Ruth found Mark on the porch. Spring darkness had fallen, bringing the sound of insects and the smell of warming earth. He stood, looking out at the homestead, his face peaceful. Hello, Mrs. Brennan, he said, without turning. Ruth's heart skipped. That will take getting used to. We have time. She joined him at the railing. Stars filled the sky, brilliant and countless. I need to tell you something. Mark turned to her, concerned. What is it? A letter arrived, today, while we were at the church. I found it when I went to change. From James. Mark's jaw tightened. What did it say? I didn't read it, Ruth said. She pulled the unopened envelope from her pocket. I burned it instead, in the stove. Didn't even open it. Mark stared at her. Ruth, that life is over, she said firmly. Whatever he wrote, whatever new cruelty he invented, it doesn't matter. I'm not that person anymore. I'm not the ugly daughter, or the joke, or the disappointment. I'm Ruth Brennan. I'm a wife and a mother and a woman who can fix a henhouse door and plant a garden and love your children. His words have no power here. Mark pulled her close. She felt his heart beating against her cheek. I'm proud of you, he said into her hair. They stood together in the spring darkness, the homestead quiet around them. After a while, Mark stirred. Come with me. I want to show you something. He led her to the garden plot. In the fading light, Ruth could just make out the full planting she'd done over the past days. Rows of vegetables, herbs along the edges, even flowers at the corners because Sarah had asked for them. Look, Mark said, pointing. Ruth knelt. The early plants she'd started in the cold frame were now transplanted here, and they had already begun to grow. Lettuce leaves unfurling, radish tops pushing through, tiny green shoots everywhere, reaching toward the sky. It's working, she breathed. It always was, Mark said. You just had to give it time. Ruth stood and walked along the rows, touching the plants gently. Everything she'd planted with uncertain hands, everything she'd tended while doubting her place here, was growing, thriving. I want to tell you something, she said. When I first came here, I thought I was only worth what I could do, how useful I could be. But you taught me something different. You taught me I'm worth just existing, just being, that my value isn't in what I produce, but in who I am. That's the truest thing you've ever said, Mark replied. Ruth crossed to the cabin window and looked at her reflection in the glass. Not the dark, distorted reflection of that first night in the Parker house. This reflection was clear, lit by lamplight from within. And behind her, in the glass, she could see Mark's reflection. And beyond that, through the open cabin door, the children's drawings on the wall. The home they'd built together. She smiled at her reflection. The face was the same, but everything else had changed. She saw herself now as Mark saw her. Capable hands, kind eyes, strength that came from surviving and choosing to hope anyway. "Come inside," Mark said, taking her hand. "It's getting cold." But Ruth lingered a moment longer, studying that clear reflection, finally seeing herself truly, not the joke they'd sent, not the burden she'd feared she was, but the answer to Mark's prayers, to the children's needs, to her own longing for a place to belong. She was exactly enough. Inside, the fire crackled. Mark was already banking it for the night. Ruth moved through the cabin, touching things that were now truly hers. The curtains she'd mended, the table she'd scrubbed, the chair she'd fixed. Small acts of care that had become acts of love. She checked on the children one last time. Both slept peacefully, Sarah clutching the doll Ruth had mended, Thomas with his rock collection arranged on his nightstand. In her own room, no, their room now, Ruth changed into her nightdress. Mark waited, giving her privacy. When she called softly that she was ready, he entered. "Strange," he said. "How natural this feels. Like you were always meant to be here." "Maybe I was," Ruth said. "Maybe I just had to travel a long way to find where I belonged." They lay in the darkness, the unfamiliarity of sharing space gradually settling into comfort. Mark reached for her hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For staying. For choosing us when you could have run. For being brave enough to believe you deserve this." Ruth squeezed his hand. "Thank you for seeing me. For making me believe I was worth seeing." Outside, spring continued its work. Ice melted, ground thawed. Seeds split open underground, pushing toward light. Inside the cabin, a family slept, whole, healed, home. Ruth's last thought before sleep was of her reflection in the clear window, surrounded by the reflections of her family, finally seeing herself as she truly was, not the ugly daughter, not the joke, not the burden or the disappointment, or the one who wasn't enough. Just Ruth. Wife, mother, beloved. Exactly right. She wasn't what they'd sent. She was the answer to a prayer. And that was more than enough.